Ladies and gentlemen, what you're about to hear is not just another political speech. It's a sermon that was so out of touch, so outdated, and so painfully hypocritical that the world itself decided to pull the plug. Literally. Yes, President Cyril Ramaphosa of South Africa, leader of the ANC, a party famous for demanding that everyone else follow international law while conveniently ignoring it themselves, was in the middle of a dramatic pro-Palestinian crescendo when his microphone was cut. Think about the symbolism. The world didn't just disagree, it switched him off. And here's the irony. This speech was already dead before it began. Why? Because the United States had already vetoed the very push Ramaphosa was championing. He was fighting for momentum that had already been buried. Today, we're going to break down this entire fiasco. We're going to quote his words directly, dissect them line by line, and highlight the dripping hypocrisy of the ANC, a party that preaches respect for international law, but treats it like a buffet. Take what you like, leave what you don't. By the end, you'll see why the mic cut wasn't just an accident. It was a metaphor, a signal that the world is running out of patience with ANC double standards. Before we dive into Ramaphosa's outdated sermon, let's set the stage. The African National Congress, the ruling party of South Africa, loves to lecture the world about international law. It rolls off their tongues like gospel. They call on Israel, America, the West, hell, anyone they don't like, to obey UN resolutions, respect court rulings, and bow before the almighty judgment of international bodies. But when it comes to themselves, different story. The ICC and Putin. Remember when the International Criminal Court issued a warrant for Vladimir Putin? South Africa, as an ICC member, was legally obliged to arrest him if he set foot on their soil. Did the ANC show the same respect for international law they demand from Israel? Of course not. They danced, dodged, and schemed to make sure Putin would never be inconvenienced on their watch. Rules for thee, not for me. Domestic law. The ANC talks about upholding democracy and justice. But back home, it's a mess of corruption scandals, court rulings ignored, and constitutional principles bent whenever convenient. International law? They don't even consistently respect their own law. Alliances. They cozy up to regimes with appalling human rights records, but raise their fists high against Israel because that's the popular political move. Consistency? None. Principle? Missing in action. So when Ramaphosa stood up to deliver this grand sermon about the sacredness of international law, the hypocrisy wasn't just obvious. It was blinding. Let's hear his words. He began,
I'd like to thank France and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia for convening this very crucial conference. This is a moment of great significance, not only for the people of Palestine, not only for the people of Israel, but for all people who cherish the ideals of freedom and self-determination.
Nice opening, polished, diplomatic. But here's the problem. Freedom and self-determination means different things depending on which side of the ANC's mouth you're listening to. For the Palestinians, yes, of course. For Israelis, not so much. For South Africans under ANC corruption, forget it. He continued,
Shortly after the United Nations was created, the General Assembly adopted Resolution 181, which recommended the creation of two states, Israel and Palestine. Immediately after the adoption of this resolution, only one state was created, the State of Israel, casting and ushering the Palestinians into a decades-long wilderness of statelessness, characterized by decades of occupation and now genocide.
There it is, the word genocide. And this is where the sermon starts to show its bias. He skips over decades of Arab rejectionism, skips over the wars waged against Israel, skips over the fact that Hamas, the elected rulers of Gaza, explicitly call for Israel's destruction. Nope. For Ramaphosa, it's all just Israel exists, Palestinians suffer, case closed. But let's pause here. When the ANC talks about genocide, does it ever mention the violence, corruption, and state failures that have left South Africans in misery? Where's the accountability at home? Again, rules for thee, not for me. Then came this gem.
I'd like to congratulate the President of France, President Macron, for today announcing a very bold decision to support the long overdue creation and the recognition of the sovereign state of Palestine. President Macron, I stand here to congratulate you and to congratulate others who have taken this step.
Congratulations all around. A diplomatic group hug. But what Ramaphosa forgot to mention is that France's position is symbolic. Recognition on paper doesn't create a functioning state. Hamas still rules Gaza. Mahmoud Abbas clings to power in the West Bank. Recognition means nothing without governance, stability, or an end to terrorism. And while Ramaphosa was congratulating Macron, the U.S. had already made it clear such recognition isn't happening at the Security Council. The veto had already crushed the momentum. He was celebrating a victory that didn't exist. Ramaphosa continued.
South Africa reiterates its firm commitment to the creation of a contiguous Palestinian state existing peacefully side by side with the State of Israel along the 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital.
Translation: Israel, roll back to borders that even former Israeli leaders admitted were indefensible. And here's the kicker. Ramaphosa says peacefully side by side. Really? With Hamas? With Islamic Jihad? With groups that literally pledged to wipe Israel off the map? It's like promising peaceful coexistence with a neighbor who's sworn to burn down your house. Now credit where it's due, finally.
South Africa condemned the 7th October attacks by Hamas that resulted in the deaths of more than 1,200 people.
Months later, a condemnation. But it's the ANC's favorite trick. Mention Hamas's massacre briefly, then pivot immediately to Israel's disproportionate response. Ramaphosa continued.
In response to this attack, Israel has unleashed disproportionate punishment against the people of Palestine.
Disproportionate? What exactly is proportionate when terrorists butcher civilians, kidnap children, and hide behind human shields? Should Israel just shrug and wait for the next massacre? Again, hypocrisy. If South Africa were attacked on that scale, would Ramaphosa stand still? Or would he unleash everything at his disposal? Then came the ANC's shopping list.
And we say here today that the only solution to this conflict is a two-state solution. The viability of a two-state solution depends on full and universal respect for international law. All states, including the State of Israel, must comply with the collective obligations under international law. As the UN marks the 80th anniversary, we call on all member states to recognize Palestine and to act in solidarity with its people. To restore the prospects of a two-state solution, we call, firstly, for global recognition of Palestine and its sovereignty and territorial integrity. Secondly, the immediate ceasefire and an end to the genocide and the release of hostages by Hamas and prisoners by Israel. Thirdly, the full respect for international law, including the respect for UN resolutions and opinions and the decisions of the International Court of Justice. Fourthly, the removal of obstacles to the two-state solution, including a halt to illegal settlements and removal of the separation wall. Lastly, the restoration of the humanitarian aid and reconstruction of Gaza.
1. Global recognition of Palestine. 2. Immediate ceasefire and end to genocide. 3. Release of hostages by Hamas and prisoners by Israel. 1. Full respect of international law and UN resolutions. 5. End settlements. Remove the separation wall. 6. Restore humanitarian aid. Rebuild Gaza. Sounds noble, but look closer. Prisoners by Israel actually means convicted terrorists. Respect for international law. What he means by that? Everyone else must obey, but not the ANC. Remove the separation wall. What he means is let terrorists flow freely into Israel. Humanitarian aid. What he means is we must ignore the fact that Hamas steals much of it. It's a wish list written in fantasy ink. And here's where the speech becomes tragic comedy. The United States had already vetoed a UN text that leaned heavily toward Hamas's narrative. Washington made it crystal clear no resolution blaming Israel while downplaying Hamas would pass.
Colleagues, U.S. opposition to this resolution will come as no surprise. It fails to condemn Hamas or recognize Israel's right to defend itself, and it wrongly legitimizes the false narratives benefiting Hamas, which have sadly found currency in this Council. Council members ignored when the United States made clear that this resolution was unacceptable. The Council instead adopted for performative action designed to draw a veto that extends Hamas terrorists and those who fund them and support them and gives them a lifeline. Let's recall that Hamas started this brutal conflict on October 7th, 2023, when it perpetrated the worst massacre and kidnapping of Jews since the Holocaust. To the approval of its supporters who took to the streets on October 8th to praise what Hamas had done, Hamas promises to repeat October 7th. Despite everything, Hamas has no regrets. The lives of Gaza's civilians in harm's way are mere tools in the project to destroy Israel. Hamas continues to hold 48 hostages. Those who remain alive are captive in a living hell. It has done so for 713 days. We have seen the chilling videos and images of how Hamas has starved the hostages. In this Council, we have heard heart-rending testimony from freed hostages, how Hamas brutalized and sexually assaulted them during their captivity. Hamas is responsible for starting and continuing this war. Israel has accepted proposed terms that would end the war, but Hamas continues to reject them. This war could end today if Hamas freed the hostages and laid down its arms. This resolution has other serious defects beyond just failing to condemn Hamas. First, the United States has stressed since this conflict began that Israel has the right to defend itself. This resolution seeks an immediate, unconditional, and permanent ceasefire that would leave Hamas in a position to carry out future October 7th attacks, as it has threatened to do so many times. This resolution draws a dangerous false equivalence between Israel and Hamas. There can be no equating the two, full stop. The hostages in this resolution are a mere afterthought. The United States will never accept this. President Trump will never accept this. He has made clear all 48 hostages must be released now. This resolution also refuses to acknowledge and seeks to return to a failed system that has allowed Hamas to enrich and strengthen itself at the expense of civilians in need. This resolution wrongly references the IPC report with its flawed methodology, changed standards, and clear bias. Gaza has humanitarian needs because of Hamas, and because the international community turned a blind eye to the true use of the billions in aid that it provided. Israel takes clear risks by working every single day with the United States and regional partners to deliver aid to civilians, as we witnessed today. As Ambassador Huckabee said, initial reports show a terrorist arrived at Albany Crossing, driving an aid truck intended for Gaza, and murdered 2 Israeli soldiers. This heinous act betrays the trust in humanitarian efforts. We offer our condolences to the bereaved IDF families. This resolution fails to recognize the reality on the ground that there has been a meaningful increase in the flow of humanitarian aid. However, the UN's own data shows that approximately 85% of UN aid sent to Gaza since May 19th has been intercepted. We must ensure that this aid reaches the civilians who need it, rather than sustaining the Hamas terrorists. The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, the GHF, supports that goal, delivering over 167 million meals to date to those in need, rather than to Hamas. GHF works well, and it is untainted by the extreme failure of other organizations at the UN. The UN and the Council members should support the GHF and other mechanisms, including airdrops by Jordan, the UAE, and international partners facilitating deliveries of food and other supplies into Gaza. These mechanisms have delivered humanitarian assistance and other goods to those in need and denied Hamas the supply on which they have come to rely. So, the United States rejects this unacceptable resolution. It is beyond time that Hamas release every single hostage now and surrender immediately. The United States will continue to work with its partners to bring an end to this horrific conflict for the sake of the people of Gaza, who deserve a future free from Hamas, and the whole Middle East, which is ready to move into a new chapter of peace and prosperity. For these reasons, the United States of America will vote against the draft resolution and urges delegations to join us in voting against it.
Those in favor of the draft resolution contained in document S/2025/583, please raise their hand. Those against? The result of the voting is as follows: 14 votes in favor, 1 vote against, 0 abstentions. The draft resolution has not been adopted, owing to the negative vote of a permanent member of the Council.
So while Ramaphosa was demanding recognition, calling for global action, and waxing poetic about international law, the very path he was pushing had already been blocked. His speech wasn't a rallying cry. It was a eulogy for a policy that had already died. He was pushing on a door that had already been slammed shut. Finally, the moment of symbolism.
This is a conflict that has gone on for almost as long as the United Nations has existed. And we say that as the international community, this conflict must end now, and we as the international community must act now also in unison. We must now work together to achieve a just and peaceful and lasting solution. I would like to welcome the demonstrable groundswell of support for the establishment of the much-awaited state of Palestine by 142 nations.
The speaker's microphone has been cut off.
And then, click, silence. You couldn't script it better. The man preaching outdated points, ignoring the veto, dripping with hypocrisy, cut off mid-sentence. It wasn't just a technical glitch, it was a metaphor, a slap in the face, a global message: we've heard enough. Here's the big picture. The ANC loves to demand respect for international law, but cherry-picks when to obey it. They condemn Israel for defending itself, but cozy up to Russia despite Ukraine's suffering. They call for justice abroad while corruption rots their own institutions at home. They lecture others on morality while ignoring the blood on their allies' hands.
You must never be scared to kill. A revolution demands that at some point there must be killing, because the killing is part of a revolutionary act.
And now, their leader gives a grand sermon, already outdated, cut short mid-sentence, ignored by the powers that actually decide the outcome. It's not just hypocrisy, it's irrelevance. So what do we take from this? That moment when the microphone went dead wasn't just Cyril Ramaphosa losing his sound feed. It was the ANC losing its moral authority. Because here's the truth. If you want to be taken seriously on international law, you need to follow it yourself. If you want to be respected as a global leader, you need consistency, not convenience. If you want your sermons to carry weight, you need to stop preaching outdated notes after the music has already stopped. The ANC had its mic cut, but in reality, it cut itself off a long time ago. Thank you for watching. Please like, comment, share, and subscribe. See you next time.